آل محمد. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان اللعين الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين، ثم الصلاة والسلام على خاتم الأنبياء والمرسلين سيدنا ونبينا محمد وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين. ولعنة الله على أعدائهم ومنكر فضائلهم من الآن إلى قيام يوم الدين. رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقه قولي. Respected elders, brothers and sisters, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. As we mentioned last night, Dawood alayhi salam, the great king, the great prophet and messenger of God, departed this world at the age of 100. And he left behind a great legacy. He became the model of just governance, a man who had great political power and even greater piety and God consciousness. And among the great legacies of Dawood alayhi salam was that he left behind the Zabur, the Psalms. And he also was gifted by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He was gifted a very pious son by the name of Sulaiman. And last night we gave one example of the unique wisdom of Sulaiman. We mentioned that the elders of Bani Israel were skeptical that such a young boy would succeed his father, especially knowing that his father was elderly and he could die at any day, on any day. And the case that we mentioned last night proved beyond any doubt that this boy, Sulaiman, was endowed with great wisdom and foresight. Sulaiman was quite young when he inherited both Nubuwah and this massive kingdom that his father had built. And the Quran mentions this inheritance. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in Surah An-Naml, ayah number 16, He says, وَوَرِثَ سُلَيْمَانُ دَاوُودَ. Sulaiman inherited Dawood. Now, before we move on, it's important for me to just make a comment, parenthetically, and that is that this ayah of the Quran was actually cited by Sayyidah Fatima alayhi salam in her famous Fadak sermon. As many of you know, when the first Khalifa came to power, one of the first things that he did was he confiscated the orchards of Fadak, under the pretext that the Prophet ﷺ, according to him, allegedly said, نَحْنُ مَعَاشِرَ الْأَنْبِيَاء لَا نُوَرِّث. We, the assembly of prophets, we do not leave inheritance. مَا تَرَكْنَاهُ صَدَقَةً. Whatever we leave behind is charity. It's for the public. Now, the problem with this hadith, this alleged hadith, is that number one, it contradicts the clear ayat of the Quran. وَوَرِثَ سُلَيْمَانُ دَاوُودَ. When Allah says, and Solomon inherited David, because the argument here is that prophets only inherit knowledge. They don't inherit property or material possessions. But the ayah is mutlaq. The ayah is absolute. So why are you restricting the ayah to mean something specific, like knowledge? You need some sort of indicator. And how can you use a hadith that is only narrated by one person and is not corroborated by any other companion, how can you use a solitary report to override the apparent meaning of the Quran? Zawahir al-Quran hujjah, the apparent meanings of the Quran are evidence. So how can you override strong evidence like that with a solitary report? And furthermore, if the Prophet did indeed say, we the messengers do not leave inheritance, doesn't it make sense that he would have shared this with his daughter? The one person who would have inherited from him? Why would he leave his daughter Fatima in the dark and he shares this information with Abu Bakr? And by the way, no one other than Abu Bakr could corroborate this. In any case, that is a discussion for another day. وَوَرِثَ سُلَيْمَانُ دَاوُودَ. Sulaiman, he inherited Dawood. He inherited the position of prophethood. He inherited the Psalms of David. He inherited the understanding of the Zabur. And he inherited the political power. He inherited this great kingdom that had been built by his father. وَقَالْ, again continuing ayah number 16, وَقَالْ يَا أَيُّهَا النَّاسِ. He then said to the people, Sulaiman said to the people, عُلِّمْنَا مَنْطِقَ الطَّيْرِ. He says, we, presumably he's referring to himself and his father, he says, we have been taught the language of birds. وَأُوتِينَا مِنْ كُلِّ شَيْءٍ. And we have been given every sort of blessing. Now it's interesting here that Sulaiman, he says that we have been taught the language of birds. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave Dawood and Sulaiman, he expanded their comprehension. They were able to comprehend the speech of birds and they were able to communicate with them. Now, of course, brothers and sisters, sometimes we read this and we say, oh wow, that's a mu'jizah, and we read on. But we have to understand, brothers and sisters, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is wise in what He gives. He doesn't just distribute blessings haphazardly. He does it in a measured way. There's a reason, there's a wisdom behind it. We know that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us in the Quran, وَلَئِن شَكَرْتُمْ لَأَزِيدَنَّكُمْ. If you are grateful, I will increase you. Now, when we combine this ayah with the ayah where Sulaiman says, وَعُلِّمْنَا مَنْطِقَ الطَّيْرِ, we understand that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He had given Sulaiman a tongue, the ability to speak. And He gave Sulaiman the ability to hear. And because Sulaiman used the blessing of speech in the most beautiful way, he never used any words that caused harm to anyone. He used the ni'mah of speech for its intended purpose, which is to glorify and praise Allah and to guide and to benefit the people. And because he exercised that gratitude in speech, Allah expanded his ability to communicate with more creatures. He was able to speak to birds. When it came to the ni'mah of hearing, Sulaiman alayhi salam, he never listened to anything that Allah had forbidden. Sulaiman was a very attentive listener. He was not someone who was oblivious or negligent. And hence, because he used the ni'mah of the ear in a way that was pleasing to Allah, Allah expanded his comprehension. So he was able to comprehend more. He wasn't only able to comprehend human beings, he could comprehend beyond that. He could speak to human beings and he could speak to other creatures. It was an expansion, an increase in that ni'mah. So if we want Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to increase us, we have to be grateful for what He has already given us. And we have to utilize those blessings in a way that is pleasing to him. Ya ayyuhan nas ulimna mantiq at-tayr. And it's interesting that before he even mentions anything, he mentions this unique knowledge that Allah has given him. عُلِّمْنَا مَنْطِقَ الطَّيْرِ وَأُوتِينَا مِنْ كُلِّ شَيْءٍ. We have been taught the language of birds and we have been given every sort of blessing. Now, every sort of blessing includes understanding the language of birds, but he singles it out. He singles out this special knowledge that he had been given. Because there is nothing, because to Sulaiman, this special knowledge is greater than any other blessing. Because there is nothing that brings a pious person closer to Allah than ilm, than knowledge. Even if it is the knowledge of birds. عُلِّمْنَا مَنْطِقَ الطَّيْرِ وَأُوتِينَا مِنْ كُلِّ شَيْءٍ إِنَّ هَذَا لَهُوَ الْفَضْلُ الْمُبِينُ. Indeed, this is a very clear advantage that Allah Azza wa Jal has given us. Now, Sulaiman was not only able to speak and understand the language of birds, but he also had the humility to learn from them. He used to take lessons from the birds. He never felt that, oh, these are inferior creatures, they should learn from me. No, Sulaiman was a king who had that type of humility. And you compare Sulaiman to the so-called superpowers today, who look at other parts of the world as degenerate. We are the superpowers, and the Eastern world is regressive. They're a bunch of degenerates. They look at them as these are the Orientals. These are subhuman people. They have nothing to offer us. But look at Sulaiman, this noble king. He has the humility to understand that I can benefit and learn from any creature of God. Forget about human beings, even animals. Even animals can be a source of inspiration. There's an interesting narration. Allam al-Majlisi, he mentions this in Bihar al-Anwar. He says, أن سليمان رأى عصفورا يقول للعصفورة. Sulaiman, he once heard a very humorous conversation between two birds, a male sparrow and a female sparrow, husband and wife. And the male sparrow says to his wife, لِمَ تَمْنَعِينَ نَفْسَكِ مِنِّي. Why is it that you always reject my advances? He wanted to be intimate with his spouse, but she kept on snubbing him and rejecting his advances. And then Sulaiman, he hears the male sparrow say to his wife, وَلَوْ شِئْتَ أَخَذْتُ قُبَّةَ سُلَيْمَانَ بِمِنْقَارِي فَأَلْقَيْتُهَا فِي الْبَحْرِ. He starts to show off to his wife. He says that, you know who I am? If I want, I can take the dome on the palace of Sulaiman, I can rip it off with my beak and I can throw it in the sea. As we say, he was trying to flex in front of his female companion, his wife. فَتَبَسَّمَ سُلَيْمَانُ عَلَيْهِ السَّلَامُ. Sulaiman, he smiled when he heard this conversation between the male sparrow and the female sparrow. ثُمَّ دَعَاهُمَا. Sulaiman, he told those two birds to come. He wanted to chat with them. وَقَالَ لِلْعُصْفُورِ. So he says to the male sparrow, who claimed that he could take the dome of Sulaiman with his beak and throw it in the ocean. He said to him, أَتُطِيقُ أَن تَفْعَلَ ذَلِكَ? Are you really able to remove the dome of my palace and throw it into the sea? You're a tiny bird. You can do that? فَقَالَ لَا يَا رَسُولَ اللَّهِ. No, I cannot do that. So from this hadith we learn that all birds lie sometimes. But what does he say? ولكن المرء قد يزين نفسه ويعظمها عند زوجته. The male sparrow, he says, O Messenger of God, sometimes husbands, they embellish in order to impress their wives. Right? They say things to impress their wives, and that's basically what I was doing. وَالْمُحِبْ لَا يُلَامُ عَلَى مَا يَقُولُ. And a lover, I'm in love with my wife. And a lover is not blamed for what he says to his beloved. So Sulaiman, he was very moved by this. This male sparrow, so much love, he is willing to even exaggerate his abilities just so he can win over the heart of his wife. So then he calls on the female sparrow, the wife. So Sulaiman is doing counseling, not just for human beings, even for birds who are having marital issues. فقال سليمان للعصفورة لم تمنعينه من نفسك وهو يحبك. He says to the female bird, why do you reject his advances? He wants to be romantic with you. Why do you reject his advances while clearly he loves you? فقالت يا نبي الله. She says, O Prophet of God, إنه ليس محبا لكنه مدعي. He doesn't really love me. He just claims to love me. لأنه يحب معي غيري. Because he also loves other female birds. He's a philanderer. The hadith says, so she's basically saying that he claims to love me, but his heart is scattered. He also loves other birds. He also does things to impress other female birds. فَأَثَّرَ كَلَامُ الْعُصْفُورَ فِي قَلْبِ سُلَيْمَانَ. Those words from the female sparrow deeply affected Sulaiman. And Sulaiman, he started to think about what it means to truly love Allah. And the claims that we make about how much we love Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We say that we love Allah, but we love a lot of other things along with Allah Azza wa Jal. And sometimes those other things that we love take precedence over Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. وَبَكَى بُكَاءً شَدِيدًا. Sulaiman, he began to cry. He started to question the authenticity of his own love to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And the hadith says, وَاحْتَجَبَ عَنِ النَّاسِ 40 يَوْمًا. After this incident, he secluded himself for 40 days, away from people. And he started to make a dua. And this is amazing about Sulaiman. This is someone who's a king. But look at the things that occupy him. Look at the things that concern him. يَدْعُ اللَّهَ أَن يُفَرِّغَ قَلْبَهُ لِمَحَبَّتِهِ. For 40 days, he prayed to Allah saying, Oh Allah, empty everything out of my heart except your love. وَأَن لَا يُخَالِطُهَا بِمَحَبَّةِ غَيْرِ. And do not mix into my heart the love of anything other than you. Because the reality, brothers and sisters, if you love anything other than Allah, the object of your love, whether it's money, whether it's people, no matter what it is inevitably going to disappoint you. It's going to disappoint you. There is nothing that you love that is going to reciprocate in a way that will satisfy you, except when you make Allah the object of your love. And in fact, when you make Allah the object of your love, you are automatically going to treat everything with compassion and mercy, Because when you love the Lord of the worlds, you're also going to show mercy and kindness to His creatures. And therefore, loving everything for the sake of Allah is actually the healthiest way to love. And I think, brothers and sisters, this should also give us pause. When we go through these stories, it's not for the sake of entertainment. I'm not sharing these stories so we can just add some list of cool stories that we know about Sulaiman. We should start asking ourselves, can I truly say that I love Allah? What does it mean to love Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? When you love someone deeply, the last thing that you would ever want would be to disappoint or anger or upset your beloved. How many things do we do on a daily basis that disappoint Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? When you love someone truly, they should occupy your thoughts. You should want to talk to them. Is it possible to say, I love this person so much, but I never talk about them? I never talk to them. If we love Allah, we should speak to Him more often. If we love Allah, we should follow the example of the one who is most beloved to Allah. قُلْ إِن كُنْتُمْ تُحِبُّونَ اللَّهَ فَاتَّبِعُونِي يُحْبِبْكُمُ اللَّهِ. Say, O Muhammad, say to the people that if you love Allah, follow me. Follow Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa alihi. Because there was no one who was more beloved to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala than this great personality. On another occasion, Sulaiman alayhi salam, he heard another conversation between two birds. And again, this goes to show you that he's interacting with these creatures in a way that is developing his own spirituality. Right? He's very perceptive. He's very reflective. وروي أنه عليه السلام سمع يوما عصفورا يقول لزوجته. One day he hears two birds saying to each other. The husband says to the wife, أدن مني حتى أجامعك. Come close to me so that I can be intimate with you. لعل الله يرزقنا ولدا يذكر الله فإنا كبرنا. Let us have a child, because we're getting old and we want to have a child who will live on after us, who will praise and remember Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. فَتَعَجَّبَ سُلَيْمَانُ مِنْ كَلَامِهِ. Sulaiman was amazed when he heard this, that this pure intention of these birds, that their niyyah is, we want to have children, not for personal reasons. We want to have children because we want there to be another bird in this world that praises and glorifies Allah. And Sulaiman, he says, هذه النية خير من مملكتي. Sulaiman, he says, this pure intention of that bird is better than my entire kingdom. Why? Because my kingdom will eventually end. But the value, the reward for that type of intention is eternal. It never ends. There's another story that I'll share. There's a story that says that there were a pair of birds who built their nest close to a road that Sulaiman alayhi salam and his entourage would pass by. So when these birds, they have their nest, they have their eggs are about to hatch, and they see the massive entourage of Sulaiman approaching. So they were afraid that the soldiers and this massive group of people would destroy their nest. So the narration says that the male, the mother and the father, the two birds, they say that let us go and offer a tribute to Sulaiman and request him if he can reroute his army. So the male bird retrieved a date. He had a date that he had collected in his nest. He was saving it for his chicks. And he said that I will give this as a gift to Sulaiman. And then I'll ask him to redirect his army. And the female bird says that I have also something that I will give to Sulaiman. A locust that I'll offer. And this is for Uncle Shabir, since he likes locusts. I'll give a locust to him, and this will be my tribute to him. ثُمَّ تَعَرَّضَ لِسُلَيْمَانَ عَلَيْهِ السَّلَامِ. So the two birds, they start to flap their wings and they catch the attention of Sulaiman. So Sulaiman, he sees that these two birds are trying to get his attention. فَلَمَّا رَآهُمَا وَهُوَ عَلَى عَرْشِهِ. Sulaiman was sitting on his throne, right? It's this massive entourage. بَسَطَ يَدَهُ لَهُمَا فَأَقْبَلَا. He basically opened his palms, and the birds, they fly and they perch on the palms of Sulaiman. فَوَقَعَ الذَّكَرُ عَلَى الْيَمِينِ. The male bird sat on the right palm of Sulaiman, and the female bird sat on the left palm. وَوَقَعَتِ الْأُثْنَى عَلَى الْيَسَارِ وَسَأَلَهُمَا عَنْ حَالِهِمَا. The narration says that Sulaiman, he started to talk to them, asking about them, their well-being and so on. فَأَخْبَرَ. They told Sulaiman about that the fact they're expecting, chicks and so on. فَقَبِلَ هَدِيَّتَهُمَا. They offered these small gifts, a date and a locust. And Sulaiman, he accepted the gift. And they said to him that we're giving this gift to you because we have a request. We want to inconvenience you. We're asking if you can reroute your army, because we're afraid that our nest will get disturbed and destroyed. So Sulaiman alayhi salam, he does. He accepts these gifts and he reroutes his army because he does not want to risk destroying a bird's nest. وَمَسَحَ عَلَى رَأْسِهِمَا وَدَعَى لَهُمَا. He wiped on the heads of these birds and he made dua for them. Now, why am I mentioning this? Brothers and sisters, Sulaiman is willing to redirect his army, take a different route, just so he does not damage a bird's nest. We're not talking about human beings, a bird's nest. And if you look today, and I think the contrast is staggering, where you have an apartheid state today who lays claim to Dawood and Sulaiman and all of these great prophets. And not only are they unwilling to let people live in peace, no, they're willing not to destroy birds' nests. They're willing to completely obliterate entire cities and bomb women and children and dump white phosphorus on them and completely annihilate an entire nation. And not only that, that's not enough. And then you have certain people from their government and their supporters who are already talking about how much value the waterfront properties in Gaza will have. Imagine that. These are the types of leaders that Allah sent to their forefathers. But look at how far they have fallen from grace. How far they have deviated from the humanitarian, the humanness, the gentleness, the mercy of Dawood, the justice of Sulaiman. Look at how far they've gone, brothers and sisters. And that is why it's important for us to reflect deeply on these stories. Yes, we might not be the ones who are directly involved in the destruction, but we have to make sure that we are not complicit through our silence. Inshallah, in the coming nights, tomorrow night we'll speak in depth about the kingdom of Sulaiman and the various bounties and blessings that Allah conferred upon him, and we'll try to draw lessons. And we'll also speak about Sulaiman alayhi salam and his interaction with the valley of the ants. And we'll speak, inshallah, on our final night about the beautiful correspondence and interaction between Sulaiman alayhi salam and the Queen of Sheba. And ultimately, we'll reflect on the ayah of the Quran that speaks about the death of Sulaiman alayhi salam. Wa akhiru da'wana alhamdulillahi rabbil alameen wa sallallahu ala Muhammadin wa alihi at-tahirin.